tonight's message. I appreciate you guys being on the line. But I'm sure we're in for tonight for a good treat and for a good lesson on a snowy day. Um, Seems as if God has given us almost uh, the picture of the story for tonight. So it's very interesting, and I'm going through the day to day in the mix of the snow and in the storm. I'm understanding how to travel through the storm. Um, Tonight we'll be speaking on that and um, talking about how when God sends us somewhere, no matter the storm ahead, when we know that God has given us a promise and we know that God has set us forth to go somewhere, no matter what it looks like and no matter the storm, and we're going to get to that destination and understanding how that works. And I've been out myself today, just couldn't stay in, so I got out and was going around checking on my grandmother, my godmother, my mom, and I was getting stuck in the snow and understanding how as time was moving and trying to get home in time, I kept getting stuck, but I knew that God had this word for me to get to you guys on the line. So I knew no matter how many times I got stuck or how bad that it looked or how close time was, I was sure that I would be on the line at the right time. But even getting home and my lights being out, and God even showing me how we have to change ships sometime and change what we're doing in order to complete the task and for God to get us where we're going. Sometimes we have to change paths and change tasks because we're on one path, but then God has them to change ships in the story tonight in order for them to get to where He's going. And I'm actually doing tonight's lesson from a different place from home, seeing that we've had to change locations and change ships in order to get tonight's message. So as I've been going through my day, God has been revealing this message in many of personal ways, and maybe you guys have been dealing with some storms and some things, but tonight's message, understanding how to make it through that storm. But tonight's message being the ship was shattered, but the pieces remained. And right in Acts 27 and verse 44, it says, "And the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land." And so tonight's message, I'll be talking about Paul and how he was in the middle of a storm and understanding that he had been put in by God in order to go to speak in Rome and go to enlarge the church in Rome there and speak before the people there, so that the church would move and be enlarged at Rome. But he knew in the mix of everything that he was going through, that because he had to do this, that no matter the storm, that he was going to make it, which he told the other sailors that was on board with him. And tonight's message, just understanding that the ship may be shattered and we may lose some things and we may lose some people and we may have to change some things that we're doing. But in tonight's message, even though those ships are shattered, the pieces remain. And if we just grab a piece and if we just grab a part of those things, and even if they stopped us from going to church, if we just grab a piece in it, a part of it, that we'll be able to make it to shore. We'll be able to get to where God has taken us. And tonight's message, I want to read, I have a scripture, or actually I want to read a couple of scriptures that I found interesting and profound. And the first one I want to read is chapter 37, right at verse 4 is where I'll start reading. And it says that delight thyself also in the Lord, and He shall give thee the desires of thine heart. Since commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in Him, and He shall bring it to pass. It says, and He shall bring forth the righteousness as the light, and thy judgment as the noonday. It says, rest in the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Fret not thyself because of him who prospereth in his way, because of the man who bringeth wicked devices to pass. It says, cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not thyself in any wise to do evil. It says, for evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. And so I'm understanding what we're doing and how we're going through this the story and how we're going to make it, that we have to trust in the Lord and lean not to our own understanding, for he'll direct our path and he'll make sure that everything is set to where we need it to be, but understanding that in this we have to delight ourselves in the Lord, and that he'll give us the desires of our heart. And so he'll change our heart. He'll change some things that we're looking and that we're wanting for, to change them in order for us to be able to want the things of him and the things of God that he set forth for us. And so sometimes he'll change the desire, so he'll give us the things to want, not give us our wants, and so that we'll understand how to change in a way that he can use us in order to open up and bring more people through. And then I want to move over to 2 Corinthians chapter 4. If you turn to there, and I want to read a bit of this one because I found this chapter actually pretty profound. But as we move forth and as we preach to people and speak to people, I was saying that therefore, seeing we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we faint not. It says, but have renounced the hidden things of dishonesty, not walking in craftiness, nor handling the word of God deceitfully. It says, but by manifestation of the truth, commending ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. But if our gospel be hid, it is hid to them that are lost. And so it says, in whom the God of this world have blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. For we preach not ourselves, but Christ Jesus the Lord, and ourselves your servants for Jesus' sake. And so when we're preaching to people and we're speaking to them, we want to preach Christ Jesus the Lord, because this is what will save them. And it says, and for God, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, have shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. And so this light that has shined in our hearts, this is the light of the knowledge. And so understanding how we're to use this, it says, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels. It says that the excellency of the power may be of God and not of us. And so understanding that how as it's saying that the treasure is unfading glory that accompanies the new covenant. The power is to bring about that lies only with God. We have this in earthen vessels, and it's trying to get us to understand the metaphor of how the mortal human bodies to where I'm understanding how the content inside of it will appear more glorious if the container that it's in is more humble. So understanding how as the container, as we become more humble and we humble ourselves, that the substance that's inside of us, it will appear more glorious because of how we handle it. And so as we humble ourselves down, that God will work through us and work in us in a way that we've never been able to do before. But we have to understand that it is Jesus Christ that does this, and that is the power of God and not the power of us. And so understanding that we have this in earthen vessels, it's just talking about the bodies that we have this in, and understanding how that container, the more humble the container is, that the more glorious that the precious contents inside of it appears. And it says that we are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. And it says we are perplexed, but not in despair. And so understanding how we go through things and we're troubled on every side, remembering how Job was, he was troubled on every side, but he understood that God still worked. But we're troubled on every side, but we are yet distressed. And so it says even persecuted, but not forsaken, cast down, but not destroyed. It says always hearing about in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our bodies. It says, for we which live are always delivered unto death for Jesus' sake. So we're already delivered all the way unto death for Jesus' sake. It says that the life also of Jesus might be made manifest in our mortal flesh. And so it's trying to make this life and trying to bring this to manifest in our mortal flesh. So it's teaching us how we have this power and how we have this in these vessels, and it's of God. But it's trying to make the life of Jesus also to be made manifest in our mortal flesh. It says, so then death worketh in us, but life in you. It says, we having the same spirit of faith, according as it is written, I believed and therefore have I spoken. We also believe and therefore speak, knowing that he which raised up the Lord Jesus, he shall raise up also by Jesus, and shall present us with you. For all things are for your sakes, that the abundant grace might through the thanksgiving of many redound of the glory of God. It says, for which cause we faint not, but through our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. And so we faint not in our well doing, for in due season we'll reap if we faint not. In Galatians, understanding that we have to not to faint, for in due season, when that season comes, we'll reap the things that's waiting for us. But we have to remember not to faint, and we be renewed day by day to where we're learning and we're standing our word and we're grooming ourselves to a day by day we're getting better. And it says, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. And so the things that we're dealing with now are very of a light affliction, that worketh, it said, for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. It says, while we look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. It says, for the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. And understanding how this works, and how we have to understand that it's the things that we don't see that's eternal, for the things that we see are just temporary. They'll just be here for just a while. It's just for now, for it'll come to pass that it'll pass over and it'll change. But the things that we don't see are the things that's eternal. It says, for we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, that we have a building of God and not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. And so understanding that we have this, and this is why we walk by faith and not by sight. And verses 8, it says, we are confident, I say, and willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Wherefore we labor that whether present or absent, we may be accepted of him. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that every one may receive the things done in his body according to that he have done, whether it be good or bad. And understanding how these things happen, and how will be judged for what happens, and the mix of our storms. There's things that comes in order to deter us, in order to steer us away, but understanding how not to grow weary and well doing, for in due season we'll reap these benefits, and we'll be able to talk about the things that we've been through after we go through them, and we'll be able to stand on these things. But in the mix of the storm, understanding that sometimes in this storm we've been looking at the ships and the boats in the past couple of weeks, and understanding how they were on the ship and they were saved with Noah, and then how the disciples were in the ship and they had to go to Jesus and tell them to save them unless they would drown and perish. And then we've seen another story when the disciples were in the boat, and Jesus had to come, and as he came this time, the storms and the winds, they stopped, and they were calmed. But at this point, we're looking at a story to where we're looking at a group to where they're traveling in a time, and it's a winter season, and that's why I say it's strategic that we've had the storm today, because they're traveling through a winter season, to where understanding how they were traveling and trying to go at a time to where it was a much worse time, because the storms and the season that they were in, and understanding how they traveled between mid-September to mid-November, and how they were traveling in this time period. they were at the end of the sailing season, and so it was dangerous for them to travel at this time. But Paul knew that he had somewhere he had to get to, and understanding that even in the time that we're traveling through now, and being the church and being the ones that's thinking radically and believing in God. Now it is a time to where people are stopping and people are finding reasons and things to not to come to church and not to believe. But this is the time now, and understanding that they were traveling at a time when you got paid double if you made it, and so understanding how God showed Job off, and how it was some things that he had to go through, but he was able to get double for his trouble, and so understanding how tonight's story, Paul knowing that he had a mission, and he knowing that he had somewhere to go, he understanding that he had to get there. There was some things that was set up for him, and I want to start to work through the story tonight, because I want you to see how it all unfolds, and how it moves. And I want to start right at Acts 27. I'll start there and start to kind of work my way through, and we'll see how the story unfolds, and how God works in the storms. And even when the boats shatter and the ships shatter, we can use the pieces, and we can use the things that's left from that thing shattering, and we can make it through, make it to the place, and make it to a shore where he has put us and where he has set us up for us to go. And so in Acts 27, it starts and it says, "And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus' band." And it says, "And entering into a ship of Adramyttium," it says, "we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia." And so understanding how they had gotten on a ship, and the ship that they had gotten on, it was going and it was on the way to Asia. But see, the thing about it is God is so strategic, and this is why I said they had to change ships, because the ship that they were on at first was headed to Asia, but the thing is they had to change ships, and in the mix of our storms and in the mix of God taking us places, sometimes we have to change ships from one place to another, and we have to go change directions and change some things in order to make it. But the thing is, God will bring this apart. God will bring this to pass, and God will create some things that's strategic enough for us to understand that we know where we're going, but we have to figure out how to get there. And so they understood where they were going, and they knew that this first boat that they had got on was going to Asia, but he needed to go to Rome, and which means he needed to be going towards Italy. And so in verse 3 it says, "The next day that we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go into his friends to refresh himself." And it's showing us how he had friends there, and he was able to have some time to where he could refresh himself. And it says, when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And saying it says, "And when we had sailed over the sea of Sicilia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia." And so it says, "And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us therein." And so this is where they changed ships, because he had to find a ship that was going to where he needed to get to. And so God placed the centurion there, because being bound and being a prisoner, he was being taken this way, and seeing, sometimes we think that people see things as a prison, but this is his way of being transported to where he has to go, and even understand how sometimes we can be imprisoned in our mind. And so understanding that jail isn't the only way to be in prison, that sometimes in our thoughts and sometimes in our mind we can be locked up. But he understanding who he was, he knows he has to move, and he uses this way of transportation because he's not worried about the shackles and what it looks like. He's free in places that man can't lock him up. And so that's how we have to be about God. We have to be free in places that man can't lock us up, to where we can do the will of God. We can do the work of God without worrying, and get the reward. And it says, "And when he had sailed slowly many days, and scarce will come over against Credus. It says the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmon. It says, and hardly passing it, it says came unto a place which is called the fair havens. It says nigh where unto the city of Lasea. And so understanding how the fair havens and the protection and how it worked, it says now when much time was spent and was sailing was now dangerous because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them and he rebuked them and he sent them away, and he said unto them, sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be hurt and much damage, not only the lading and ship, but also our lives. And so he's telling them about this journey that they're getting ready to take. And sometimes we're in a mix of a ship and a journey, and God has us in the mix of a place to where it's possible that we will lose everything, including our lives, but we have to keep on traveling and believe. And he says, nevertheless the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. And it says, and because the haven was not commodious, it wasn't comfortable for them to winter in, it says the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenix and there to winter. And it says that which is an haven of Crete and lieth toward the south and to the west. So this was their safe place. And it said that when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, losing thence that they sailed close by Crete. It says, but not long after there arose against it a tempest wind called Euroclydon. And so understanding that this wind rose against them as they came close to this shore, in the sense, and when this wind rose, and when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. And so understanding how we're in the midst of a storm, and the winds are coming, they're fighting against the winds, and they're fighting against these waves to where it'll take them a little longer because they have to fight against all the forces that's pushing against them. And so sometimes we're pushing against all of our outside forces, and everything around us is pushing us back and pushing us one way, but in the mix of the ship that God has us in, we have to understand how to fight the waves and how to fight these things. And they're in the mix of this storm, and they've been caught by a wave, and say that when the ship was caught, they couldn't bear up into the wind, and say we let her drive, and running under a certain island which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat, which when they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strike sail, and so were driven. And so understanding how in this point in time that they will understand that as they came into these winds, and as they were running into these different parts of the storm, that the ship was being hit, and the ship was taking some hits in some ways, that it was being broken, and they had to tie some helps on the ship. And so it's telling about sometimes how we're in the midst of a storm, and we're going through things, and that we're taking some hits, but we have to get some help. And they had to tie some helps around the ship, fearing that they will fall apart. And so sometimes when we get ready to fall apart, we have to understand that we have to find our help, and we have to get some help. And so they tied the helps on the ship, and it says, and we being exceedingly tossed with the tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. And so understand that sometimes that we have to lighten our loads, and sometimes we have to get rid of some things, so that as we're going through the storm, we're not so heavy, and we're not carrying so much. And so they lightened the ship. And the third day says we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship, and when neither sun nor stars and many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. And so they were in the mix of the storm, to where understanding how as the skies closing, and how as everything around them started to darken, and everything started to look as they didn't have any hope, and they didn't even have a way to figure out what the weather was and how to determine what was coming. because of how the weather was going and how they weren't able to see the stars and everything, and so their hope was taken away, that they should be saved at this time. It says, but after long abstinence, it says, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and have gained this harm and loss. And so he's telling them they should have listened to him when he told them that they shouldn't have left, and that they shouldn't have taken off in the mix of this, because the storm was so drastic, and God had told him about the storm and about how bad it was, but he told them that now I exhort you, and says to be of good cheer. And so in the mix of the storm tonight, that I want to tell somebody to be of good cheer in the mix of the storm. It says, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. And so he's telling them to get ready, because there's some things that you're going to lose, and the ship is going to be lost in the mix of this. But he's telling them that no matter what, the ship is going to be lost, but there won't be any of you lives lost. So he's already telling them to be of good cheer and to think positively, because how they think plays a big part. And so we have to understand that we have to stay of good cheer, and we have to keep our faith in order to keep moving forward. But this, he told them that even though the ship would shatter and the ship would be lost, that none of their lives would be lost. And I'm sure that they're confused, because if I'm in the middle of a ship and you're telling me that the ship would be lost and that the life of the ship would be gone, how wouldn't I not be gone too? But if you understand, when God speaks, God will give a word that sometimes you don't understand. And so at this point, he's telling them not to worry about the storm, and not to worry about the things that you're going through, because he said, even though I told you that we shouldn't have left because of the losses that we would take, that he understood he had to go where he had to get to. And he told them that even though the ship might be lost in the mix of the storm, that not any of the men's life among the ship would be lost. And it says, for there stood by me this night an angel of God, whose I am. And so if you understand that you're God's, and you understand who you are, and when the angel speaks to you, you can hear this, and you can receive the word, because part of how we move is receiving the word. Because if we don't receive it, then we have no power in it, we won't move on it. But if we receive the word, then we can take it and have strength in it and move forward with it. But he tells them, for an angel of God, whose I am and who I serve. And so understanding that he's shown us some things. Not only do he knows whose he are and who he is, but also he said whom I serve. So before he's in the mix of this storm, and before he's going through this, and he has to hear from the angel of God, he's already serving, and he already knows who he is. So in the midst of our storms, we have to know who we are, and we have to know whose we are, and understanding that who we're serving and who we're making our requests known to, so that God can bring this to pass. And so he says that he whom I serve, saying, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. And understanding this is the word of God coming to tell him that he had already put in place that he must be brought in before Caesar. And so this is the part to where God has already given us some things that we have to get done, and he's already set it in place to where that place that we're going to be standing in, and that place that we're going to be going to is already set. It's waiting for us to get there, and it's waiting for us to go through the storm and go through some things to where we can stand in that position. Because at this point, when we have a guarantee from God that there's some things that we have to do, I don't care what's in front of us, I don't care how it looks, when God tells us that he has something for us to do, we can make sure that we're ready, because we can ensure ourselves that God will prepare us, and that God will ensure that we get to that place no matter the storm, and no matter how it looks. Even if it looks like we can't perform the blessing, or we're not going to make it to the place, if God has given us this promise and told us that we have some things that we have to do, then we can ensure that we'll make it through the storm. And so this is what Paul is telling them, that that I understand what it looks like. He said, but there's an angel that came to me saying, Paul, fear not. It says, thou must be brought in before Caesar. And so he's standing on God, giving him this word and telling him that he must be brought before Caesar. And also says, lo, God has given thee all them that sail with thee. And so God had already given a power to who he had on board. And God already had an inside person working to where he could get this done. And he had given the power to him. And now he's showing himself through the person that he sent, how he always does, to let the people around them understand and see who's in control and who's actually the one that's working things out. And so he tells them that wherefore, sirs, to be of good cheer. He says, for I believe God. And tonight, if we believe God in the mix of storm, in the mix of COVID, in the mix of the things that we're going through, he says that it shall be even as it was told to me. It says that it shall be just how God told it to him. And so understanding that if we believe God, and if we believe God for his word, and we believe that all things will work together for the good of them that love him, we don't have to worry, that we can ensure ourselves that no matter what we go through, even no matter what it looks like, it'll work for our good. It says that howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. And so he's talking to them and telling them that there's a certain place that they must be cast upon. And so already understanding that there's a certain island and certain place that God has us going to. All of our islands may not be the same, and we may not all be going to the same island, but God has a certain island for us to be cast upon. And it says, but when the 14th night was come, and we were driven up and down in Andrea about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. And so this is talking about at the 14th night, and understanding how the storm outside tonight, in the mix of this winter season, how the snow is and how the winds are and how people are getting stuck. Understanding it being in the mix of a storm, this is talking about the 14th night that they're in the mix of this. It says, and we were driven up and down, and in Andrea about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they had drew near some country. So going through this for 2 weeks, and then finally thinking that we've come upon some land. We finally found something that should bring us to where this is what we've been looking for. It says, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms, and when they had gone a bit further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. And so understanding how they're trying to see how close they are to shore, that these fathoms are what's telling them that they're coming closer to shore, and that they're getting closer to the land, and they're trying to see how fast they're coming in. And it says that then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon the rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for that day. And so understanding how they cast these anchors, the 4 anchors, all from the stern, rather than dropping them from the bow. If they would have dropped these anchors from the bow, that this would have swung the ship around and they would have been facing the waves. And so understanding in the mix of this, how in the mix of our storms, in the mix of the things that we go through, how we move, and the decisions that we make are strategic, and we have to understand and make sure that we're making the right decisions, because had they made the wrong choice, and had they dropped these anchors from the wrong place, to where if they would have dropped them from the bow, that this would have turned their ship around, and they would have been facing these waves and facing this water coming at them, and probably wouldn't have made it to shore. But it says that they're fearing, they're trying to figure out. It says as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship. And so understanding that we get to a point that we're scared, and we're like, I want out. I don't want any more of this. I'm ready to go. And as the shipmen were about to flee, they had let down the boat into the sea. And so under color, as they would have cast anchors out of the foreship. So understanding how they're trying to get away, and they're letting out some boats to where they can get away from the ship. Paul says to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship. ye cannot be saved. And so tonight, understanding that as we go through life and as we go through all these different things that we're going through, unless we abide in the ship and unless we stay with Christ and unless we keep God first and understand where our faith is and where our power is and where we're actually looking for to produce our blessings and where we're looking for this abundance that we'll live in and everything, but we'll understand how to be saved and how to be comforted and how to keep our peace and how to keep everything at a calm, because we understand that as long as we're in the ship that we don't have to worry. And looking at the ships before with Noah and the disciples, understand that God created these ships for us to be safe and for places for us to not have to worry, because on most of the ships he was there with them, even if he wasn't there physically in spirit. Understanding how we move and moving with God, a move of God, and the sounds of that. How we move is all important, because God is in us, and as he's in us and how we move, we're still moving with God daily and keeping staying on that ship is how we'll be saved. And as Paul, he had to stop them and let them to know that you're letting down boats, and you see the storm that we're fighting, and you think you're going to make it on those boats, but he told them the only way that they would make it to shore is on that ye abide in the ship. And so the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall. And so they had to let go of their disbelief, and they had to let go of what they didn't believe and they couldn't see, and they had to let it fall, because when they understood who Paul was and they understood that God was speaking through Paul, they understood that they might as well go with his decision, and they should go where he was leading them. And when he told them that they wouldn't be saved unless they were on the boat, they cut off these ropes so that the boat could fall. And it says, while the day was coming on, Paul besought them and all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day that ye have tarried, and continue fasting, having taken nothing. It says, wherefore I pray to you, take some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not an hair from the head of any of you. And so understanding that he says that an hair fall from the head of any of you, he's telling them that this is for your health, and he's trying to feed them to where they can understand how to stay healthy and how not to be so stressful and stressed out to where not a hair from their head should fall. So in the midst of this, they shouldn't be stressed, to where understanding that stress kills more than anything else. And he's trying to get them to understand in the mix of the storm how to eat and how to be healthy and how to stay in comfort. And if we stay in the Bible and understanding that what our food is and how we stay fed in our word, that if we keep our word in us and we keep with the word of God and stay on the boat, that there's not a hair that will fall from our head, because we won't be rattled and we won't be shaken up. We'll stay right on path no matter what. And he says, and when he had this spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. And so understanding how he had to give thanks, and he had to show them and be an example to them of how to give thanks for the blessing and how to fulfill this. And after he had gave thanks, it says in the presence of them all, showing us how they're all there and they're all seeing him. When he had broken it, he began to eat. And it says, and they were all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And so after he gave thanks to God, and so in the presence, he had showed them how this worked. After they were able to see him and they took some meat, they were all of good cheer. And so understanding how they were able to come into good cheer is important, because we have to keep our cheer up. And it says we were all in the ship 216 souls. And so understanding how this ship and how many this ship is carrying, and it says, and when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship. It says, and cast the wheat into the sea. And so understanding how we have to lighten our ship, and so understanding that after he had given thanks and after he had eaten and they all were full, that they had to get rid of this because it had became heavy for them. And in the midst of this storm, I'm going through the storm, Paul understood that they had to get as light as possible. And so going through this, that this wheat had become heavy to them, and that they needed to have the boat as light as possible for the damage and the loss of the boat not to be so treacherous, and for them to reach ground. And so understanding how they had to get rid of this after eating and lighten the ship. And it says, and when it was day, that they knew not the land, and they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust into the ship. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto sea, and loosed the rubber bands, and hoised up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. And says, and falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground. And so understanding how at this point they had fallen into a place to where two seas had met, and they ran the ship aground. And understanding how Paul had already told them that they had to run the ship aground. This is everything coming to pass that Paul had spoken to them. And it says, and the forepart struck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part, the back, was broken with the violence of the waves. And so understanding how in the midst of this storm that the ship was shattered and the ship was broken, and in the midst of the waves, and they had to come and they came aground, but they hit the ground in a way to where the back of the ship was broken. And it said, and the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them were to swim out and escape, because more than likely that the soldiers, they would have to suffer the punishment for letting them escape and get away. But understanding that, but the centurion, willing to save Paul, it says, kept them from their purpose, and commanded them which they could swim, cast themselves first into the sea, and get to land. And understanding how God will put some people in our path and put some people in position for us to stop the ones that's trying to kill us, and stop the people that's trying to harm his people, and do some things to where we see the centurion, he was willing to save Paul, and kept the soldiers from their purpose, and he commanded them to leave the ship, those that could swim, to go first and get to land. And says, the rest, some on board and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they all escaped, all safe to land. And so tonight's message, understanding how the ship was shattered, and how everything was disassembled in the midst of this storm, going through all the waves that they went through, that the ship was breaking as they were going through every different piece. And as the ship shattered, and as the ship disassembled itself, and as the helps gave away, and our helps give away, that even in this time when the ship shattered, that if we just grab a piece of the thing, and if we just grab a board, if we just grab a part of this, that we'll still be able to make it to shore, and we'll still be able to make it safe to the land. And then after this, Paul was able to do some things, because God started to work through Paul when he hit the land. And then we see when they have appointed Paul, all he did, he preached God to the people, and this was God fulfilling his blessing, because after Paul came to this point, he was put in a position to where he was set to take the gospel to the Gentiles. And Paul's preaching day and night in the seat of the pagan, the Roman Empire, ensured that Christianity, it said, we become an international phenomenon, not just a regional religious anomaly. So understanding how the power of God, and how what Paul was set to do, and how he understood that he had somewhere he had to go to, and he had to get there and teach and speak on God, and teach the people how to be saved, that he knew in the mix of this storm that no matter what, he had to get there. But understanding, even as the ship shattered, and even as we're going through our storms, and things are shattering, and we're losing people, and we're losing things, and as things change, and as we come to shore, things are changing. In the mix of the storm, when the ship shatters, if we just grab a piece, and if we just grab something that we can hold on to, the people that we're losing, if we just grab a hold on to a piece of them, that we'll be able to remember them and keep on going to where God has set us. The things that we're losing, if not the cars and things like that, but the things of God that we're losing, if we grab a piece of them, the church, if we're not able to go, if we grab a piece of it and bring it home with us, we'll be able to make it safely to shore, and everybody with us, everybody on our boats will be saved. But we have to understand that going through our ships, going through our storms, and understanding how that as we're going through these things, we have to keep focus on God, and as we're going through our ships, how God has already set us so we have something that we have to get done, and we have some things that has to come to pass because God has told us and God has given us His word. But in the mix of this, the boat may shatter, and the thing that they were traveling in may give out, and it may shatter. But if we just grab a piece, and if we just grab a part that we understand that some of them that couldn't swim made it in on board, or some on broken pieces of the ship, and so as it came to pass that they all escaped, all safe to land. That as we go through, if we can understand, even in the mix of the storm, that this time they weren't able to stay on the boat and be safe and be saved, but this time it was some work that they had to do, and there was some things that they had to do themselves. And so sometimes it's our part that we have to do, and it's some things that we have to do. And so as this ship was shattered, in order for them to make it to shore, if they wanted to safely, they had to move fast, and they had to grab a piece, and they had to grab something that would hold them and that would help them get to shore. And in tonight's message, as we're going through our storm, and as we're going through all these things that life is bringing us, the COVIDs and the regular things of life, and the social issues, and our regular issues, and our illnesses and sicknesses, as we go through our storms and we go through the things that we're going through, we just understand that the ship may shatter, but if we just keep a peace and understanding that God has already had us going somewhere, that they will make it there safe, and that we'll be able to bring the blessing forward. So tonight, remember that the ship was shattered, but the pieces remained, and so we just hold a piece, and if we just get a hold of a piece of whatever it is that's shattering, that we'll be able to remain, and that we'll be able to keep moving forward, and understanding in the mix of this storm who Paul was, and his life story, that he had came a long way, but now understanding God and moving on God's behalf. The ship was shattered, but the pieces remained.